Ahlaki değerlerimiz Tanrı'nın varlığına delil midir?
Are our moral values evidence for the existence of God?
Yeah, this is a great question that you raise. And this is the matter of what's sometimes called a moral argument for God's existence. So, and when we say a moral argument for God's existence, the truth is there are a variety of various arguments for God's existence. And that includes a variety of moral arguments, distinctively moral arguments for God's existence. And this is kind of my area of specialization. This is what I like to work on quite a bit. It's just a fascinating field. It really is a fascinating field. So let me talk about the moral argument a little bit generally, and then I'll narrow the scope of the discussion down to this matter of objective values, if that's okay. So the basic idea behind moral arguments for God's existence is that morality points evidentially to God in one way or another. And the way this typically works, at least the way I do it, is we identify some moral fact, like the existence of moral duties, or the existence of moral values, or our need for forgiveness as human beings for the moral wrongdoing that we do, or the correspondence between a righteous life and a happy life, or something like this. And so we recognize these moral facts, these moral realities, and then we ask the question like, okay, what view of the world really makes best sense of these facts and of these realities, right? And as I say, you can do this with respect to a whole range and array of moral facts and experiences. But this argument from moral values, in all honesty, I consider to be one of the very, very best moral arguments for God's existence. And we can speak of objective moral values generally, but what I'll do for present purposes is zero in on one specific kind of value. Because I want to talk about, again, this matter of human value and how it in particular gives us reason to believe that God exists. Because when we apprehend, all of us, the value of fellow human beings, it raises a serious question of how is it that people could have the kind of value that we intuitively think that they do. And God makes an excellent explanation, provides an excellent explanation for this kind of infinite value of human beings. Much better than, say, what our atheist friends could provide, right? According to whom, we just sort of naturalistically came about. We have no spirit, we have no soul, we're not eternal creatures, we're just collocations of atoms and molecules. It's not at all clear, if that story is correct, why we would have the kind of deep, infinite value and dignity and worth as human beings that we intuitively think that we do. So I find this to be a really nice bridge building exercise with, say, folks who don't believe that God exists, because I can start by saying not something negative or critical of them. I can actually affirm that in their humanity, on my view, they have infinite worth and infinite dignity and infinite value, right? And that's a nice way to start a discussion, as opposed to, you're bad or something like that. And we are kind of bad too. There's that discussion to be held, and what to do about that. But I find this appeal to intrinsic human value to be a really great segue to have a substantive conversation about where the evidence that we all encounter every day, where it leads, And I think that it leads directly to the existence of a good and loving God. I'm really deeply convinced of that. Now, nowadays, in my culture, and I'm sure in lots of cultures, I'm not entirely sure how it is in Istanbul. I suspect it's different to some real degree. But in my culture, and this is sort of an indictment of my culture, truth be told, when people hear a notion like human dignity, the way it often gets interpreted nowadays in my culture, and again, probably in many places throughout the world, is, well, in order for me to recognize and appreciate and value your dignity as a human being, I need to respect your ability to make whatever choices you might want, right? And, you know, if a man says, I want to be a woman or something like that, you're supposed to say, oh, that's fine, and I agree with you or whatever. I don't want to stand in the way of your freedom of choice. I think this was a really bad mistake that has taken place here. And I think historically, it wasn't that way at all. When we talked about human value and dignity and worth, we were talking about things that all of us had in common as human beings, right? And it was about recognizing that. I mean, I think, for example, of the civil rights movement in my country, so in the 1960s and 1950s and so forth, right? The basic argument was, you know, well, the African Americans should be treated like the other non-African Americans in the country, because all of us are human beings and all of us deserve to be accorded worth and dignity and respect, you know, and basic rights and all of that, right? It was this beautiful appeal to what we have in common. The shift that's taken place really just the last few decades, although there's a lot of historical precursors that led up to this, of course, it has been instead, well, dignity is about respecting people's absolute sovereign choice to make whatever choice that they want. But that just flies in the face of reality, right? Some choices that we make maximize our humanity more than other choices. Not every choice should be equally affirmed. I think that's pretty clear. But every human being, right, has value and dignity and worth, and we should all affirm that. I think that part of what's going on here is when we use the word good, right? When we use the word value, that's often connected with the word good. And we could talk about, well, human beings, they're good. In one sense, they are. We're good in the sense of having been made in God's image. We're good in the sense of, having been created for reasons and purposes. We have this potential to love our neighbor and as ourselves, and to love God with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength. All of that is good. And that speaks to our intrinsic value and worth. But that doesn't mean that we're all morally good, right? Because we all have capacities to do some things that are good and so forth, but we all fall short, right? We all fall into sin and corruption, and we are in need of forgiveness. And we're not necessarily morally good at all. So though we are valuable, right, that doesn't mean that every choice should be equally affirmed. That certainly seems like a mistake. And so I just make mention of that because I like to talk about something like human value and dignity. But I kind of feel like in the contemporary discussion in my culture and in many places throughout the world, I imagine, that discussion has become a little distorted because of this emphasis on, well, dignity means sovereign choice to do whatever it is that you want, no matter what. But some choices make us more fully human, and other choices make us less fully human, and they stand in the way of our becoming the people we were meant to be. So I would carefully distinguish between those two. But rightly understood, I think something like human dignity really does raise a serious evidential question. Where does this dignity come from? Where does our infinite value and worth come from? And I think the best account on offer is that we have been made by God for reasons and for purposes and for fellowship with Him and for fellowship with other people. And we have been made in His image, And that makes us special and distinctive. And this is not to say that other life forms don't have value. They probably have great value. I think animals, probably have value, but they don't have the kind of value that we have as human beings. And I think it's related to the fact that we're never told in the Bible that the animals were made in God's image, but we were. And I think that makes us a very special sort of creature, and that all of us as human beings intuitively recognize it. And that's crucially important if you're trying to construct a moral argument, because you can't presuppose what you're trying to establish in the argument, right? So you don't have to believe first that God exists and God made us in his image, before you recognize that we have intrinsic value, you can recognize intuitively that we all have intrinsic value. And then you can ask that question, okay, now what best explains it? Naturalism or theism, right? Or something else. And I think theism wins hands down. So yeah, this is a really powerful version of the moral argument. And in recent times, in the past, I had worked on different versions of the moral argument, and there are plenty of them, and they're really interesting and compelling. Epistemic versions and duties-based versions, and ones that focus on our need for forgiveness and change and transformation and ultimately perfection. All of these, I think, point to theism. But I think this discussion of human value and dignity and worth gives us a really neat, almost unique opportunity to build a bridge with those with whom we're in dialogue, and find some common ground and say some things that are truthfully really affirming of them as we're having this conversation, because they're human beings and we believe that they have this kind of value. All of us do as human beings. And then, having generated this conversation, having built some bridges, then we could just have an honest conversation, right? Is this sense that people have this kind of value a reliable sense, or is it just, in our imagination? I really think it is reliable, and I think it's a window of insight into the nature of the world. And so I highly encourage folks who want to use evidence and argument to persuade others to take belief in God more seriously, to give some real thought to this matter of human dignity, value, and worth, and think about it in terms of what sort of evidence that is. Like, where does it point? And I think that it points straight to value and dignity and infinite worth. So that's my answer to that question.